let's just talk a little bit about you and introduce you to some of my viewers.
I call myself an HIV activist, campaigner, advocate, unashamedly positive.
Unashamedly positive. Yeah, you did use that. And I like that because, it's a very open, sort of, unashamed, totally sort of out there.
Yeah.
And just talking about, why the stigmas that exist around HIV is, it doesn't need, we don't need it. And why people just need to be a little bit more educated and a bit more open.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I always kind of think that the most important thing that I can do, because I've got a background in the media, is to just kind of talk about living with HIV. So I've been HIV positive for 10 years. And I think, thinking back over those 10 years, I think back to 2007 when I was first diagnosed. And actually, there were so few gay men that I knew personally, but also in the public eye who were living with HIV, and it felt really, really isolating. And still, that same thing happens for guys. Anyone who's diagnosed HIV positive, they kind of feel very, very isolated. And so, I'm at a really good place with things. I've got an amazingly supportive family and friendship circle, and that means that, I feel very, very able to be open about my status. I use that term unashamedly positive because an HIV diagnosis often carries a lot of shame with it and a lot of stigma. You mentioned stigma, but a lot of shame with it.
That's true.
One of the overriding feelings that comes across when I facilitate newly diagnosed groups is a lot of the guys that I talk to feel a lot of shame about being diagnosed HIV positive. Ultimately, it's a virus, but it carries so much shame because it's all of the politics around sex and just kind of, as a gay man, I've had to kind of deal with lots of shame that other gay men have kind of put towards me. I must have been a slut to have got HIV, I must have been this and that, and actually just no.
Yeah.
I just happen to have had sex and I happen to be HIV positive, so let's forget that.
Put that to bed.
And I'm as I said, I'm really lucky in that I have, my family are really, really supportive. I've got an amazing group of friends. I'm a trustee of Terrence Higgins Trust, and I have the backing of them and everyone who works there. So I'm in a very fortunate position, and so I feel that it's really important that I use that position, position of support and everything to really encourage other people that actually it doesn't need to be isolating. Actually, it's just a diagnosis like any other medical diagnosis, and actually it can be gotten over, and but it's all about the support that you get and feeling that you're not on your own, I think.
And the thing I find really interesting is, you see a lot of times, especially on social media, where people have, like yourself, have been very open about it, and then because of the reaction that they get from a lot of people, it sort of pushes them sort of back in the closet, so to speak. And then people aren't that forthcoming. And I think also the big issue that causes or creates is, one where people then are afraid to go and get themselves checked to see if they are, if they do have the virus or not. And it means obviously that, and you'll know better than me in terms of your work with the Terrence Higgins Trust, that a lot of people then, don't go on to getting the treatment that they need soon enough. And then obviously that impacts their quality of life later on. And that's something that I've always found, really sad in a sense, because...
So sad.
Sorry?
It's so sad. It's so sad that the stigma stops people going in and getting tested. It stops people who have been diagnosed with HIV from seeking treatment. Among my friendship circle, I have friends who were diagnosed really late when they were really, really sick. And it's just so sad,
Yeah.
you know, that stigma is so all pervading. And so, you know, I want to do everything in my power to try and break that down and say, actually, do you know what? It can be okay, but you've got to kind of break through that. And yeah, it's difficult. It's not easy, but you know, I'm a great believer in kind of changing the world one step at a time, you know.
I mean, that's the only way to do it, really.
Well, it is, yeah.
And do you think that, I mean, obviously earlier when you first discovered, when you were diagnosed, and this was back in 2007, wasn't it? And at that time, you know, looking sort of back, do you think that much has changed in terms of people's attitudes and also people's understanding and knowledge? Because that's a really big sort of issue, I think, just generally, not only within the LGBT community, but sort of the wider
Widely in society.
you know, there are people who you hear them saying things and you think, well, that just doesn't, you know, you can tell it just doesn't sound right. I mean, and you know from your own knowledge it's not right, but people walk around with things that they think are fact when it isn't. But do you think that's changed a lot since?
Gosh, not as much as it should have done, you know, in 10 years. I mean, you know, we've had effective treatment for HIV since the mid-90s and it's got better and better. But there are still people who think that, you know, there is no effective treatment for HIV. There were all sorts of kind of weird sort of myths around how HIV is transmitted. A recent survey that Terrence Higgins Trust did found that just a shockingly small number of people know how HIV is transmitted. Those kind of myths that you would think that we'd gotten over about sharing cutlery and crockery and that HIV could be transmitted by kissing, are all kind of still there for lots and lots of people, and even among gay men.
Yeah.
And actually, do you know why? I think because we haven't got effective sex and relationship education in schools. We've certainly not got LGBT inclusive sex and relationship education in schools, and that has a huge effect on all of society, but especially on LGBT people, you know, who feel that their relationships aren't valid, don't know how to keep themselves safe in terms of HIV and other STIs. Yeah, I mean, it's one of our big kind of campaigning issues, and I think we've seen some progress there, but it can't come quickly enough, really.
Yeah, and one of the things that's always surprised me is the fact that as a community, and this is not only with the issue of HIV, but you know, across the board, in terms of discrimination within the LGBT community, you'd have thought that as a group of people who have faced so much in terms of intolerance,
you would have thought, but hey,
it's just the one of the most sort of bizarre things to me when you sort of take a step back and you look in and you think, my goodness, you know, do we not stop and think as just as people in general, but especially as a group of people who've had such, you know, troubles in terms of discrimination and tolerance and acceptance. You know, do we not stop and think actually what we're doing is the same thing when we sort of just discriminate against somebody because of their status, or you know, because of the way they look, or you know,
well, you know,
me.
As a strategy, you know, what we would describe as zero sorting. So guys who are HIV negative only kind of seeking out other HIV negative guys or supposedly HIV negative guys. Actually, that isn't a terribly good strategy to keep you safe, because actually, for someone like me, I've got my little badge on here that says can't pass it on. So I'm HIV positive, have been since 2007. Since 2010, I've been on HIV treatment, antiretrovirals. So I've had what's known as an undetectable viral load. That means I can't pass on HIV. I can't pass on HIV. I will say it again, I can't pass on HIV. So that means that because I know my status and I'm successfully on treatment, I'm not the person that you need to you need to fear in terms of risk around getting HIV. It's those guys who say that they are negative in quotation marks and don't know because they've either never been for an HIV test or haven't been for an HIV test for quite a while. So, you know, it's all of our own responsibility to make sure that we know where we are. And it just makes me so cross. And there are so many, you know, I can talk about my own experiences as someone who's a gay man. You know, the worst discrimination I've faced and the worst stigma I've faced has come from other gay men, actually. Really kind of, you know, quite visceral, horrible stuff sometimes. And yeah, like you said, you would think that as a community, as gay men, as LGBT plus people, we would understand what it means to be discriminated against, to be treated as other, to be shunned from society. And yet we do it to what should be our own community, and that makes me really cross.
Yeah. And it's in so many different areas as well, because one of the things that I've always found really, really funny is sometimes when you see on people's profiles, you know, or people might say it, say, oh, I don't date
black,
I don't date
no
black people,
Asians, no fats, no femmes, no. And it's just, how ugly is that though? How ugly is it to see kind of this list of negative kind of statements? That's just a really ugly thing to kind of see.
And then people, you know, they justify it by saying, oh, you know,
it's just a preference
or whatever. Yeah.
Well, you know, you know, there were things that I prefer versus other things, but that doesn't mean that I would ever kind of go no, because it's just really bizarre. And also, there's not a very sensible way to live your life if you kind of blank people just straight away, because it's not a very exciting life if you do that.
No.
Well, I don't think so anyway.
I agree with you. I have to agree with you on that one. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the fact that you're a trustee at with the Terrence Higgins Trust.
Yes.
And you have been for how many years?
Since 2013. So I was re-elected end of last year for a second term. So yeah, and it's an amazing charity. It helped me so much when I was newly diagnosed. And one of the most important things that I did on my journey was going along to a newly diagnosed group that was organised by Terrence Higgins Trust. And I feel like I've come the full circle really, because I'm now facilitating some of those newly diagnosed groups. And to see the kind of the change in the people that we're supporting in those groups, both week to week, and then over the 6-week span of the groups is amazing. It's such an amazing thing for me as a volunteer, and for me personally to kind of see how I've come from someone needing support to being in a position to be able to give support to others. So I always kind of say when I talk about what it means to be living with HIV and how you can make it easier, I always kind of talk about how it's so important to not feel that you're on your own, and to seek out other people that can kind of support you and support you on your journey and kind of boost you up really. And yeah, that was very much the case for me, and I see it all the time in the volunteering work that I do with the trust.
Yeah. I mean, what sort of, if somebody's out there who's watching and who thinks they're a bit scared about going and getting tested, even if they just suspect that they might be infected, or they just don't know what to do, what sort of things would you say? I mean, obviously that's something that the trust can help with. They offer support.
We can offer support, but I mean, the most important message is to bite the bullet and go and get tested. And there are so many ways that you can get tested now. So there are self-test kits that you can get. So I remember when they first came in and doing a bit of kind of media work around those. You can get tested in all sorts of locations. You can get tested at your GP's practice. You can get tested at a GUM clinic, a sexual health clinic. There are all sorts of ways that you can get tested. And actually, one of the campaigns and the work that we're doing at Terrence Higgins Trust is around normalising testing, I guess, and making sure that testing is available in what are not necessarily considered kind of those normal settings. So making sure that GPs are more aware of the signs to look for if they have someone turning up with sort of like a flu-like virus and they can't kind of think of what the cause is, that actually they, should consider doing an HIV test. In those areas where there's kind of a high prevalence of HIV, actually would like to see when people sign up at a new GP's practice, them being given an HIV test is one of those routine tests that you get when you sign up at a new GP's practice. So it's all about kind of rolling out HIV testing to more places and making it easier for people to get to, and just normalising it really. It should be just like any other test. The thing I would say is, you can't change whether you are HIV negative or HIV positive, but you can take control of that situation by going and getting tested. If you're HIV positive and you don't know, then your health eventually will be seriously harmed. So it's much better to know early and to be in a position to be able to start treatment straight away. I think back to my own experience at the time, it wasn't, when I was diagnosed, it wasn't considered a good idea to start treatment straight away. But we now know through various studies that have been done that it's much better to start as soon as you can on treatment. And of course, as a dual benefit to that, not only are you protecting your own health, but you're also protecting the health of others, because as soon as you become undetectable, you can't pass the virus on. So there really is a really, really good reason to know if you are HIV positive, that you are HIV positive. And, treatment these days is a lot better than it was. I mean, actually, it's one of those things that we should be really proud of, how far we've come in terms of HIV treatment. We've gone in the space of 20 years from something that was an almost certain killer to something that is treatable and is considered, as it's now described, as a chronic manageable condition. It's something you can live with. We've moved on medically hugely with HIV, but actually the issues that the Trust kind of campaigns on are around stigma and acceptance and getting people to know their status and going and getting tested.